You're listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast. Welcome back. For this month's episode, I sat down with Justice Christopher McDonald, who was appointed to the Supreme Court in April of 2019, to learn more about his path to the bench, his views on the benefits of clerkship, and his thoughts on being the first person of color appointed to the highest court in Iowa. Keep listening. Thank you for joining me today, Justice McDonald. Can you tell us a bit about your path to the Iowa Supreme Court?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. So I went to law school at the University of Iowa, graduated in 2001. And when I graduated, I started a federal judicial clerkship. I clerked on the 8th Circuit for then Chief Judge David R. Hansen of the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit. When I was done clerking, I worked in private practice in Des Moines, primarily defense side work. We did a lot of securities litigation, employment law, employment litigation. And as my career progressed, I became more of an employment counselor and started working more with HR clients, addressing and counseling them on their HR needs. And then after that, I've been fortunate enough to serve at all three levels of the judicial branch court system. So I was a district court judge in Polk County, District 5C, and then a judge on the Court of Appeals for 6 years. And I've been on the Supreme Court for 3 years now, I think. That's right.
You mentioned just now serving as a law clerk. Can you talk about the value of clerkship after law school?
Absolutely. I clerked for 2 years on federal circuit court. And I think it was the most formative experience I've had as a lawyer and the most important experience I've had as a lawyer. And I would highly encourage anyone who's going to law school to consider clerking. I think there are several things that you can take away from it as a young lawyer. The first of which is mindset. So if your intention as a lawyer is to be a litigator, I don't think there's anything that could be more valuable than understanding how a decision maker actually decides cases. And you really want to understand what moves the needle in terms of legal argument and legal writing. And working side by side with a judge every day for a year or 2 years is incredibly invaluable in terms of developing your practice. And then there are really some instrumental reasons why you would want to clerk. So you think about the amount of substantive law that you would learn during the course of a clerkship. The federal circuit court docket is a little bit more limited than, for example, an Iowa Supreme Court clerkship, where we're touching every area of law that can be litigated in the state of Iowa. So that's very valuable to the young lawyer. And then developing kind of your practice skills, further advancing your research skills, working on your writing skills, at the hand and at the direction of a judge is incredibly valuable. I think I became a much better writer after serving as a clerk, seeing my co-clerk's work product, seeing how my judge wanted his opinions drafted, how his bench memos needed to be done. I became much more concise, I think, in the way that I wrote, and much more persuasive in the way that I wrote. And then there's really a third part of clerking that I think is understated to some extent, which is the networking relationships that you gain through the process of your clerkship and the mentoring relationships. So in terms of mentoring, I stay in close contact with my judge. I have for the last 20 years. He's been a legal mentor to me and a personal mentor. So if I have things that I just want to bounce off of him in terms of my career or personal issues, he's just a phone call or a short drive away, and we get together for lunch. And that's been a really cherished relationship for me. And I'm so glad that I have it. And the second part is I also keep in contact with my co-clerks, and they became a professional network for me. I've worked with them as clients and then in a direct capacity when I was corporate counsel. So that network never really goes away. It's some of the strongest relationships you'll build as a lawyer, spending time with your co-clerks. So I would highly encourage it for any young lawyer.
Did you always then have your sights set on becoming a judge, or was that something that developed, say, after clerking for the federal court?
I think that's fair. I never went to law school with the intention of being a judge. That's certainly for sure. And it never even occurred to me that was really a possibility. So when I went to law school, I come from a non-professional family. I was the first person in my family to go to college and graduate from college. So I really didn't have a sense of kind of the legal possibilities of what you could do with your law degree other than what you saw on television as being a trial lawyer
right.
and trying cases. And that was about kind of the extent of my thought process behind it. And then as I was in law school, working with the University of Iowa Career Services Office and their clerkship committees, I got introduced to clerkships and how that worked and how that could help your career. And I pursued that. And then I thought about it as a clerk, talking to my judge, that maybe this would be something one day I'd be interested in doing. But it was kind of on the back burner to some extent. And then as I continued in my practice and I really had achieved the things that I wanted to achieve and gain the experiences that I wanted to have, at that point, I thought I really wanted to commit myself to public service, and that's when I started pursuing the opportunity.
Yeah, and you've done it thoroughly. Like you mentioned before, you were a district court judge, court of appeals judge, and now Supreme Court justice. Are there any takeaways from those past judicial positions that helped transition to now Iowa's highest court?
There really are. I think being a district court judge is so valuable in terms of being your experience as an appellate court judge. And there are a couple of takeaways that I really have from my district court experience. And the first of which is it really humanizes the process for you. You know, when we're here in the judicial branch building and we hear appeals, all we see is paper, really. And once a month we see the lawyers and they come provide oral argument, but many times they don't bring their clients with them to the courtroom. And when you're a district court judge, it's a very human experience, and it takes the abstract legal principles and law and it applies them to concrete circumstances. And you see the people in front of you. You sentence a criminal defendant, you rule in a custody case, you see the jury interact with each other, and you see the witnesses live. So it always puts context around everything. And I think that's very important for an appellate court judge to understand that although we're dealing frequently with abstract legal principles, we're really dealing with people who have real problems and real issues, and issues so significant that they think it's worth coming to the Supreme Court of Iowa to get them resolved. And I think it's important for us to remember that. The second part of it is being a district court judge is hard. It's very hard. It's much harder than being an appellate court judge. And I think having done it, I have a greater appreciation for the work of our district court judges and all of the people who work in the district courts, whether it's the clerk, the clerk's office staff, court reporters, judicial attendants. And I think it creates a certain amount of deference for district court decisions. And it certainly helps you understand kind of the range of discretion that district court judges have. And at least as I approach cases, I really try to afford a great amount of discretion to district court judges in making those type of discretionary decisions, because I've been there and I understand it's tough to make a decision or decision after decision after decision on the bench without much briefing or argument or even time to think about it. So I think both of those experiences were very valuable.
Right. And like you mentioned earlier, at the appellate level, it is a lot of paper. It is a lot of reading from my limited experience here. So how do you prep now for arguments? Because now we have both oral argument cases and then purely written argument cases. How does that process change as well?
Sure. It doesn't change a lot for me, depending on whether the case is submitted to the court orally or non-orally. So my process generally is I will take a look at a case real quickly. I'll skim the briefs. when I'm done skimming the briefs and I have a sense of what the legal issues are, then I will go read the record. And I'll usually read the entire record in a case. And then that really puts it in context. And now I have an understanding of exactly what happened at the district court, and it'll help me better understand the briefs. So then I go back, I do a deep dive into the briefs, I do my legal research, and then I write a bench memo, or my law clerk writes a bench memo on every case that gets submitted to us, whether it's submitted with or without oral argument. If I'm the assigned justice, I will go ahead and start working on my draft and try to get at least a good working draft with options for myself. And then that's it. So the only difference then with oral is I will go ahead and write out my questions for oral argument. And my questioning at oral argument, not related to your question specifically, but I'll go ahead and put it out there, is I really don't try to have any sort of agenda for oral argument. I'm not trying to prove a point or trap lawyers. Right. I know sometimes lawyers might think that we're trying to trick them into making concessions or trap them in a little box. And that's really not it, for me at least. I ask questions about things that I'm genuinely concerned about and thinking about, and where I really need help. And so that's really how I view oral argument, as a dialogue between the lawyers and the justices, where the justices can ask the lawyers, here are the things that I think are important about this case. Tell me what's right, tell me what's wrong, or tell me how I should resolve kind of these thoughts and conflicts in my head. And that's what a good oral argument really should look like, more like a dialogue.
Right. And now that you've been on an appellate bench, with Court of Appeals and Supreme Court, I always like to ask if you have like a most memorable or favorite case that's really stuck with you through the years.
I really don't, not at the appellate level. Some cases are more interesting than other cases. That's certainly true. Either they have more interesting facts, or they have more interesting legal issues. So that's certainly true. But I think generally I think of the cases as the same. And it relates back to something earlier we said, which is it's a real case with real parties who have a real issue that to them was important enough that they wanted to have it resolved by the Supreme Court of Iowa. So I treat them the same, whether it's a sentencing case or a custody case or a tort case or a constitutional case. They're all equally important to the parties involved.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of episodes ago, I had the chance to speak with Justice Newman, who is the first female Supreme Court justice in Iowa, and you are the first person of color who's been appointed to the bench. Does that title or recognition affect you in any way?
It's an honor to be the first person of color or first minority appointed to the Supreme Court, and I recognize the distinction. I don't think it affects me in the way I go about my work.
Right.
I approach my work the same way from case to case. I have a certain process and a way I think about the law, and I try to apply it to the particular facts of the case. I do think about it in terms of the context of leadership and maybe mentorship to younger attorneys. And to the extent that my appointment to the bench can inspire them, or I can serve as a model for them for their own careers, then I think that's great. And I try to be responsive and receptive to people who reach out to me and want to get coffee or lunch or whatever, and just talk about their careers or their practices or their own aspirations, maybe to be on the bench one day. So it's more subtle, I would say.
Right.
And it's important, but not in a work-related sense.
Right. And lastly, before we leave, if you had any word of advice or insight or sentiment that you wanted to leave about the courts with our listeners, what would it be?
It would be this, which is, the mission of the branch is to provide a forum for the fair and impartial resolution of disputes. And since the founding of this state, and the state as a territory in 1839, we've done a really, really good job at that. And our state has been a leader both in terms of substantive law and in terms of innovation and how we administer justice in the state of Iowa. And that goes back to the first decision of this court to even more recent innovations like adopting an all electronic filing system or having a business court or having specialty courts that deal with particular issues that arise frequently in the state of Iowa. So I have a great appreciation for the branch, and I hope our citizens and our listeners also share that appreciation. We have 1,800 employees in 99 counties, every county in the state of Iowa, who do their best every single day to serve the citizens of the state of Iowa, make sure that their cases are heard timely, and by judicial officers who are fair and impartial and well-trained and well-qualified in administering justice. So I hope that people listening and I hope that the citizens continue to support the judicial branch and court services throughout the state of Iowa.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, Justice
Thank you for
McDonald.
having me. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast hosted and produced by me, Marissa Gaal. If you would like more information about Iowa's courts, you can visit www.iowacourts.gov. You can also follow the Iowa Judicial Branch on Twitter and YouTube at Iowa Courts. This episode of In the Balance is now adjourned. Until next time.